Welcome back to 5 Acres Honey Farm. Today I'm going to share 5 things that I learned last year, both in beekeeping and in gardening. And I just recently got a shipment of some bottles that I'm going to be using to bottle some tinctures. I'll also link to a video of my kind of first process with getting tinctures together. And I have my propolis tincture here, and I was also doing an usnea tincture and I can't find it, which both my husband and I are pretty amused about because I like to put them in, cool, dark places away from things that they're not going to get knocked around or nudged or anything. And I just hid it so well that I can't find it. And I also have a coneflower echinacea tincture that I've done of the entire plant. I was reading about doing a whole plant tincture of it. So I have both of these to bottle, and I had ordered some, so I'm just gonna check over the glasses to make sure everything is in order while I'm chatting with you, so trying to multitask a little. I'll start with a big learning from beekeeping, and I also threw some of my own things in here for using this. From beekeeping, my biggest lesson learned last year in 2022 was how horrible the small hive beetles are in Western North Carolina, where I had set up a second apiary that it was my first year managing another apiary, and also my first year managing bees in the western part of the state at a higher elevation, in different temperature extremes, different precipitation, lots of different forage, and I didn't really think small hive beetles were going to be a big problem. I know, where I've got the hives, they aren't in full sun. They're in a very wooded area, which are signs of, making great habitat for small hive beetles. But I really underestimated it, and I didn't realize how devastating and how quickly they could be so devastating. So I have ordered some Freeman traps, which I haven't used before. So I'm going to preventatively have those set up on the hives that I'll set up out there this year, which I'm hoping to have at least one set up out there in the next month. I had to bring the 2 hives that I had out there home because they were just so depopulated from the small hive beetles, and I shared in a recent video that those 2 little hives did not make it through. So right now it's fairly empty out there, and I actually have a little video to share, which I need to post separately because it's just really, I feel like it just deserves its own dedicated video of a fox being very curious about the bee yard there, even without having the hives. But in any case, the small hive beetles were horrible. A garden learning that I had was that I have read and I have watched videos where people say direct sowing your squash, direct sowing your melons, and your sunflowers is like the way to go. And this will be my 4th or 5th year gardening, and I decided last year to really step back as much as possible from the seed starting trays. I have a video on sanitizing seed starting trays, which I'll link, and it's a lot of work, but it's only like a once a year task of sanitizing the trays, but it's not something that I like doing. So I was trying to just think ahead and try to minimize how many trays I was going to use so that I wouldn't have to clean as many. So I did not start a flat of melons, pumpkins, or sunflowers last year, which was really disappointing. And I know overall I had a fairly challenging gardening year, as many folks did across the country, but I usually have had great success with pumpkins. It's been one of my favorite things to grow, and I had a harvest of about 4 pumpkins last year, when the year before was 20 something, and I really missed having all of the vines everywhere, and it just really gets to a point in the summer where it is in that jungle mode and it looks really magical.
I just dug up this photo and a video of my previous pumpkins.
This is the Joya Violina rugosa, so it's supposed to resemble a violin, and I'm about to weigh them to see. I think these might weigh more than all of the pumpkins because I had a hard time carrying just these 3 of them. And these are all Winter Luxury Pie pumpkins, and these should all store for 10 to 12 months, which my last Winter Luxury Pie stored for 10 months as well. For me at least, and here in this particular growing region of the Piedmont of North Carolina, I definitely have better luck with starting those seeds and transplanting them after they're hardened off. So I am like really focused on having a great pumpkin harvest this year, and I want all the sunflowers. I've ordered so many sunflowers. I'm gonna be doing at least 1 flat, so 72 cells of a 72 cell tray of just sunflowers. And I've ordered varying heights because I really would like to stagger the shorter varieties so that they're in areas where they're not going to cast as much shadow on some other parts of the garden. And I particularly, just a note about sunflowers, if you're a beekeeper or if you would like to help support pollinators in general, really research and take a moment to see what type of sunflower seeds you're buying, because there are some sunflower seeds or sunflower varieties that are low to no pollen, which are really great for folks who are doing like cut flower gardens and they don't want to have that extra kind of pollen brought into the house and in arrangements. However, my goal, and I imagine if you're watching this, your goal as well, so you're interested in beekeeping and gardening, is to provide as much nutritional forage as possible for the bees, both you know, the ones that I keep and also for the native pollinators. So I specifically, and apologize for the background noise for the cockatiels, I specifically look for you know, traditional sunflowers that are not the no to low pollen. And I also look for multi-head sunflowers. So that way, going through all that effort and energy of producing a flower, it's not going to just be a single flower. It's going to be multiple heads, and then as some die off, others will start to bloom there. So that's just a little note on that. So definitely seed starting those and transplanting them out. I'm also, I'm a little more thoughtful. I started last year with, and this is kind of along the lines of the same number 2 about seed starting, is that I started documenting last year, because when you're in the thick of the summer and like the hives are going crazy and the garden's just overgrown, and there's so much harvest coming in and you're trying to preserve everything, you kind of forget like what's next, what do I need to prep for? So I started making notes and I made my own personal homestead calendar so that I can look and say, oh yeah, next month I need to have XYZ ready. So I feel a lot better going into this year knowing that I'll have that kind of set up in advance. So part of that is that I want to do succession sowings of sunflowers. You know, probably not on like a 2-week basis, probably more monthly, because I can start transplanting them out in May, and I'll probably do like the last transplant for some of the varieties like Labor Day weekend, early September, because there are some varieties that are like 50-day varieties, so they probably will have a chance to bloom before the frost comes. And part of that also is being more strategic with trying to do more floral plantings with the high tunnel, because I noticed my efforts this past fall really paid off well, and there were just so many flowers in there the last few weeks, and just knowing how many more I could have next year if I continue that would be great. The third thing that I learned this past year is also learning from keeping the bees in the western part of the state, and that is, oh my God, the honey flow is like nonstop all season, and I just could not keep up with getting equipment on the hives as they needed it. So I have so much equipment out there ready to go, rather than me getting out, doing an inspection, seeing that they need more space, seeing that they've already filled everything with honey. So I've got a ton out there, and my plan now, knowing that when the flow starts, that there's just waves and waves of a nectar flow, you know, because there's so much unadulterated land and forage in the western part of the state. So I have a better plan in place because, and just for some background, I had extracted about 150 pounds from the 2 hives, so collectively, and I had left 300 pounds on them. And then I put the empty comb back on the hives after I was done extracting. And 2 weeks later, every single frame was full of honey. They were completely honey bound. It was 6 medium supers on both hives. So they had filled in everything, plus filled in extra boxes that I gave them. So I had to do another extraction of about 100 to 150 pounds, leaving at that point like 400 pounds on them. So they were in a really good position for winter. So that's why it was extra disappointing that the hive beetles got so crazy. So I have pulled everything that they've left behind. It's cycled through the freezer, it's stored, and I am feeding that to my other colonies here in the Piedmont to get them through the winter. And I'll be able to use this honey storage to help establish the next colonies that I'll put out in the mountains. So the learning there was that there is just so much honey. My goal, beekeeping, is not focused on like honey production. It's not focused on wax production. It is just focused on the hive health, but providing enough space and helping the bees manage that space is part of what contributes to their health. So if they're completely honey bound, they don't have room to lay eggs and care for brood, and that's not really healthy. So now I'm in a better place and have better expectation of what to expect with all of the forage that they have out there. The other thing that I've learned was not a personal learning in from my experience, but something that I learned from a podcast, which I will link below. It's one of my favorite podcasts to listen to. It was interviewing a potato farmer, and I had read already some articles about how detrimental the pesticide use is on potato crops, and how it's really just like completely saturated our health and products that we get. I mean, if you think of just at restaurants, like French fries are always an option, and 99% certain those are not organic potatoes at most restaurants. And if you're thinking of like potato chips everywhere, like most fast casual and other restaurants, you'll just get a bag of chips as your side. 99% of the time, those are not organically grown. So this interview that I read really shed light on how many health conditions can be spawned from just this conventional agriculture of just potatoes, which is such a huge part of the American diet, and one of my favorite things to grow. And it also, I do, when I source my seed potatoes, I am only purchasing organic potatoes, but the podcast really makes me hesitate now in wondering, like, where really are these potatoes truly organic? Because they talk a bit about sourcing of seed potatoes between Idaho and Maine because of some fungal and pest issues, and how quickly a farm can get an organic certification, even though the actual roots are from conventional crops. So there's a certain certificate they recommend asking for. I didn't go to that effort for my garden this year. I've already put my potato order in, and but it's something that I'm going to keep in mind when I order potatoes in the next season for the 2024 garden. The last thing that I'll leave with you that I learned is, for the past few years, I've maintained a worm bin. Also have a video on that I'll link. I went to a great session at the Organic Growers School Conference north of Asheville a few years ago by a woman who runs a worm farm, and it was just fascinating, some of the trials that she showed of how the plants produce and the health of the plants with just weekly applications of worm tea. So not last year in 2022, but in 2021, I was really active in doing every other week, because it's hard for me to do every week in the growing season, but twice a month I was doing a soil drench of worm compost tea, and and then alternating between a foliar spray of worm compost tea. And those applications, like the drench, I mean, that really just takes maybe 15 minutes, and that's the time of me having to go back and forth between the house and the garden of, where I'm brewing the tea and applying it. The foliar spray does take me probably an hour to 2 hours because I have to fill the spray bottle up at least twice, usually 3 times, and then just having to go around everywhere and spray everything down. Last year, didn't really have time for it, and I know it was also just in general a challenging gardening year, but I really believe that the plants would have produced a lot better if I would have kept up with that application. Unfortunately, because things were so crazy in this past season, my worm bin should have been divided because it was just kind of getting overcrowded, and I did not tend to it in the timely manner. So I need to start a new worm bin, so they're on their way. So I'll be starting that. And since it's January and I'm starting it now, that means, by the time, definitely by the time summer, probably late spring, then I'll have some good worm compost in there that I can start using for the worm tea applications. So those are the 5 things that I learned in this past year. I'm curious, with your beekeeping and your gardening, what were your big learnings? What are you taking into the new year? Are you doing tinctures and losing them somewhere in your house like I am? That might be my learning for this year already. But I'm going to get these bottled, and looking forward to hearing what your big learnings are from this past year. So thanks for watching.